Hello, everybody. The day has come. It's Tuesday, November the 5th, election day. We don't know who's won, but many people are going to the polls. One person who won't be going to the polls is my guest today, Lauren Oyler. She's a distinguished American writer, best-selling writer, essayist, critic. But she happens to be, as I joked before we went live, in exile in Berlin. She lives there in Germany, but she's also the author of an excellent piece. It's the cover story of Harper's this week, Reunion or Revenge, the GOP's identity crisis. According to Lauren, they're on the brink. I'm not sure of what. Lauren is joining us from Berlin in Germany. Lauren, what's the view from there? Are Americans looking as crazy as ever?
We're looking for a bar to go to be honest. We've been caucusing, trying to figure out where we can watch the results, and we just found there's one place, but the results don't really start coming in until midnight here. So the debate is about whether we will stay up, or people have some bad memories of doing that in 2016. I personally have a bad memory of doing that in 2016 as well. So the view is we're looking at our phones.
So I assume the bad memory was not that you drank too much or ate too much. It's
Oh no, I did. I certainly did. I was with my boyfriend at the time, and we had gotten in a fight earlier the day about Hillary Clinton, and I just remember being like, I just don't care. And then we went to the bar with our friends and got quite drunk. And then we were walking home, and I didn't live here at the time, so we didn't have cell phone service. So we walked home at like 3 a.m. We were really drunk. And we were like, well, we won't know anything. And then we got home and we like laid in bed in the dark and then looked at our phones and we were like, oh no, this is terrible. So, and then just laid in bed, again, really drunk, looking at our phones. It's a very,
it's something, yeah. It's something that could have occurred in one of your books or maybe in a DeLillo book. So, are the Germans shocked? I mean, they've made a culture out of being shocked at other people. Are they particularly shocked this time around?
Oh no, I don't think so. I remember right before I went to report this story, I was in a restaurant down the street from my house, and I I was overhearing a conversation with this German guy was talking to these people, and he was like, he was like, yeah, have you heard they have the plague in Colorado now? He's like, yeah, this is crazy. Imagine if we had the plague in Berlin. Like, it was really like, I don't really think that they're sort of like, yeah, this is crazy, but it's not the first time. And I think too, in Europe, it used to be that you were reviled as an American. Certainly when I first moved here in 2012, there was still that kind of anti-American sentiment. But now far-right populism has spread across the West, and everybody is sort of commiserating with you, and just kind of like, it could happen to us at any time, basically, is the idea.
The plague has come home to Germany from Colorado. So let's get to the piece. Lauren, you went to Milwaukee to cover the GOP's identity crisis, and it's a long essay, very, to use a word, Oylerish, in the sense that it's a very creative piece of work, creative nonfiction, although some people might say there's a fictional element there. What was your overall take on this odd convention? What was it now? It's almost 5 months ago now.
Yeah, well, I think the big concern that I had going into it was that you're right. It would be coming out. It came out in the middle of October, and I would be reporting on something that had happened in July, which, of course, in the past would have been perfectly normal for this kind of piece, this kind of like literary new journalism type thing. Many great pieces about political conventions that I'm sure your listeners will be familiar with, famously Norman Mailer. They come out late, but now
they're timeless as well in their own way. I mean, of course,
they're supposed to be timeless, but now everybody's sort of attitude towards the news is like, I need to hear it right now, and then it, the cycle, and it goes away. So you sort of forget about it. So I kind of it was grateful for the assignment, because the assignment was basically like write something of lasting literary value about the circus or the spectacle. which was very interesting. And you know, it was sort of, you're following the news as it's happening, and you're like, well, I can't really, like, you just have to be aware of the general narrative as time has gone on. You can't really like be too obsessed with any one story, because as I learned when former President Trump was almost assassinated while I was on the plane there, like something can just completely derail the whole plan. So, but I think, you know, I'd never been to a political convention before. I was surprised at how much I enjoyed doing that kind of reporting. And I was surprised at how, at the dissonance between what was being sort of reported by these kind of like live, like up to the minute coverage, like blogs or on social media or things like this. The difference between the analysis that those journalists would generally produce and what I was sort of interested in, it, or even like what I thought the mood was, frankly. As the title of the piece and the sort of the tagline suggests, like, it was a bit fraught, I think, for the Republicans. I think the liberal media generally tends to want to keep to this storyline that they are sort of, they're like evil masterminds of the chaos that they sow. But what I saw there, at least, was kind of fracturing, basically.
Right. I mean, I think that the more I watch or listen, liberal media or mainstream media, they behave as if they're the grown-ups, and perhaps some of these photos actually underline the fact that it's the Republicans who are the children, for better or worse. They're out of control. They need to be sent to their room and perhaps spanked, although I'm guessing most liberal media people don't believe in spanking anymore. I'm curious, Lauren. I had lunch with Rick MacArthur, the publisher of Harper's, a few months ago in New York. And like all publishers of traditional magazines, he claims poverty, not enough money to go around. Couldn't you find someone a bit closer? I mean, I assume he paid for you to fly from Berlin to Milwaukee. That's quite a long way. Why didn't he find a local person? Or do you think he chose you, or they chose you, the editor chose you, because you bring a slightly foreign perspective?
You don't think I'm such a good writer that it's worth flying me over there?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I hope he did. He pay for first class? I bet.
No, they paid. There was economy, which was good actually, because I had some interesting conversations with my seatmates, and they did say, you know, we won't pay for business, but I did buy the expensive internet in the end. And I think I was staying in a Hampton Inn. Do you know how the
Oh my God! So they put you up in a Hampton Inn,
do you know
and
how
they flew you economy.
Do you know how it works? So when you go to a convention, there's like the convention assign the press corps of the convention assign you like a place to stay, and so many of the delegates were staying like in Madison, Wisconsin, or in Illinois. And I was in the same hotel as the USA Today people, so that speaks to maybe like the you know, the national the government's like belief in the value of Harper's Magazine in comparison to other places. So it was maybe like 20-minute drive away. Anyway, non sequitur. So why do you think they asked me to go? Maybe because I do have a little bit of a foreign perspective. I think too. It is nice, you know, it is nice to have a literary writer do politics coverage. You know, there's a long history of this. Norman Mailer has a wonderful introduction to this book that I have about ranting about journalists and reporters and why it's important to bring a novelistic eye to things. Joan Didion, obviously, famously, and all sorts of other examples. George Saunders did a Trump rally in 2016. I think Patricia Lockwood did one as well. So I think there's that kind of tradition that Harper's is a part of and wants to sort of continue in the face of maybe people saying that literary writing has no place in society anymore. But also, I assume that my being from Appalachia has something to do with it. Because yes, as you say, I live in Berlin, but I was born and grew up in West Virginia. And although we did not know J.D. Vance was going to be selected as the VP when they assigned me this piece, it was always like a strong possibility. And I think the region sort of exerts like a pull on the national media, at least every 4 years. So that is, I would assume that also has something to do with it.
Yeah, it's interesting that you're the other side of the appellation coin from J.D. Vance. You mentioned earlier, Lauren, that the media reported on this differently from bloggers and some of the online crowd. What are the differences? Can you generalize about how the USA Today crowd covered it versus bloggers who perhaps weren't there or were watching online?
Yeah, well, I think I think there's a certain kind of convention story that is just like we're here, they're doing there's someone on TV, they're doing a stand up, they have someone shooting them, and they're just like, I'm here live at the convention, like here's how crazy it is. But the thing that I talk about in the piece, especially, is this Ezra Klein sort of blog about the convention, and I believe the headline that he wrote was for his podcast about it was, I watched the Republican National Convention. Here's whatever, in the kind of dramatic headline style that has been honed on the internet.
And this was a New York Times piece.
It was a New York Times piece. I watched the Republican National Convention on television. Why does that, like, anyone can watch the Republican National Convention on television? And it just sort of, they want it to be like a dramatic, like sort of like a little bit dangerous kind of feeling that it did have it at points, but the thing that was surprising to me was how unenthusiastic many of the people there were, or who were just there because they've been 10 times or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, you'll have some great photos in the piece of people looking pretty miserable, which of course probably makes most of us feel better about ourselves.
Yeah, and
I mean, this one in particular, for people watching, a couple of white middle-class people with cheese hats, one with a "Make America Great Again" sign, the other "Bring Back Common Sense." They look most uncommon and most miserable.
And it's not to say that there were many sort of disturbing moments of enthusiasm, I think, but they weren't always like the people on stage that you would. And the biggest applause that I remember was not for Trump or for JD Vance. Of course, those went on forever. But the sort of passion, like the sort of scary passion that the media kind of wants to find in the Republicans, I noticed most with Peter Navarro, who'd just gotten out of prison like that day and flown to give a talk, which was so bizarre. And people were just screaming their heads off for him.
And he's the China hater, the ultimate China whore.
Yes. I think I can never remember what the sort of White House department of something that they invented that he was the head of. It was like the trade council, like some kind of trade council.
Go to war with China department.
Yes. And he had just been let out of prison, and he was missing a tooth, and which was really bizarre. And then Tucker Carlson, everybody was going crazy for because he is he's like a celebrity. But there was not this kind of excitement for, say, Kid Rock or something like this, or even Hulk Hogan.
I mean, Hulk Hogan. So here's the question for you, Lauren. I think you're as well positioned in every sense to answer this question, which is the question I struggle with, and I've talked about endlessly on the show, and I haven't resolved. I'm sure I've bored most of my viewers and listeners. You mentioned Hulk Hogan, of course, the ultimate wrestler. In fact, I had Peter Osnos on the show last week, who was the original editor of Art of the Deal, and he said when he was editing Art of the Deal, he went with Trump to a wrestling contest, and Trump was enormously popular there back then, 30 or 40 years ago. To what extent is this whole, and I use this word carefully, spectacle, just wrestling? To what extent is it just another version of reality television, and everyone understands in an odd kind of way that they're participating in this weird narrative? You've done a lot of thinking and writing on this in terms of the internet, although some of the people participating in this are pre-internet people. I mean, Trump is Mr. Reality Television. So this goes back before the internet. But to what extent is this, I don't know, reality, hyper reality, beyond reality? And how does it connect with there is a reality of America in November, on November the 5th, 2024? I hope that's I'm not sure it's a particularly clear question, but it gives you an opportunity to talk about how you perceive this whole spectacle or circus.
Well, I think that the Republican Party, and I think American society in general, certainly American media, has been in a kind of transitional phase since 2020, maybe. Don't quote me on that, but like generally, like since Trump's term was a very like crystal clear political moment in the country, I think. And it did make a lot of people sort of immediately think back and say, what did I miss about the last 10, 15 years that led to this? Like, why didn't I see this coming? Why didn't I see that Donald Trump would be elected president in 2016? And that led to all this kind of the things that you're referencing, which are, the effects of reality television, the effects of social media, the sort of the sense that the desire for kind of like a more immediate relationship to our media that developed, like all these things kind of developed in tandem, which is to say that, someone who's watching The Hills on MTV, which is sort of my demographic, is not going to be the same kind of person who's watching wrestling per se, but there are many things that those two kinds of programming have in common, right? And it is kind of the like ironic presentation of reality in scare quotes, right? And I think that Donald Trump, obviously a reality television host himself, and certainly involved in professional wrestling, can like sort of could tap into that. But I don't think we're in that period anymore. Nobody is. We aren't. I hope we don't have graduate students writing dissertations on the Kardashians anymore, which is what was, that was such a prominent force in the media in the sort of 2010s during Obama's administration. And I don't know exactly like what is next, right? The conversations we're having now are all about AI. They're all about Elon Musk, but it's certainly not this like pro wrestling spectacle thing anymore. And I think you can see that because it's not as if that was not new. Part of the spectacle that was created by the Hulk Hogan stuff was like that it was so surprising, but you can't keep bringing Hulk Hogan out every 4 years. You can't have him every 4 years.
We can with AI now. You can
right?
create an immortal Hulk Hogan, or for that matter, Trump, probably.
Yeah. And I do think that the picking JD Vance as the vice presidential nominee does indicate that they are trying to sort of move forward and kind of set the path for Trumpism after Trump. As many, that's not my phrase. It's a phrase everybody uses. Because also Trumpism is the most successful kind of like Republican like movement in a long time. You might remember the Tea Party didn't arrive, but there's a lot of dissent about that. I think a lot of older people in the party that I talked to when I was at the convention were quite dissatisfied with Trump, and they would say, I actually never liked him. I didn't vote for him in the primary in 2016. I would prefer he not do this. I overheard a man giving an interview to some wire service, and he really sounded like he was having an identity crisis. Like he was like, I don't know, this is not the party I grew up with. This is not the party I joined. What am I going to do? So there are lots of these older guys who feel that way. And then on the other side, there are lots of these young guys who I talk to who are kind of young Republicans in their early 20s. And they also don't really care about Donald. Like it's not like they're excited about Donald Trump. They're like excited by the kind of meme-ified, like free market capitalism opportunities that the Republicans sort of like scoop up, right? Like they like crypto. They like they're like, they have some really confused ideas about tariffs. Which if you sort of like press them on it a little bit, you would say maybe you actually should vote for a Democrat because Trump is just putting more tariffs on things, like just all sorts of.
I heard by the way, it's the first time in this conversation, Lauren, I've heard the West Virginian twang when you said tariffs. Say it again.
Tariffs.
Tariffs.
I mean, I can do it all day if you want. I was anticipating you would ask me to perform the accent. Well, maybe when we talk about a little bit more about J.D. Vance.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Paris. And what about China? Could you do China?
China?
Yeah.
I lived in Beijing for about 2 months.
I mean, is JD, is he the fool here, or is he the one who's being made to look like a fool, do you think?
I think he's allowing himself to be made to look like a fool.
Does he know what he's doing here?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, does he know what he's doing entirely? No. Does he know what he's doing more than like Donald Trump's kids? Yes.
It isn't hard, especially the boys, right?
Yeah.
And the girls disappeared, right?
I think
both girls have disappeared, and
yeah, good for them. I think I saw on Twitter that it's Ivanka's 43rd birthday today, maybe.
Well, happy birthday, Ivanka! I'm sure she's got better things to do. Although she doesn't seem to be participating, I'm sure she's severely embarrassed now by the whole thing.
Yeah, I think that that's a big issue for they're struggling to have like a base for Trump anymore, and there's like a base for Republican Party base, but it doesn't seem like there's that many.
Yeah, I mean, your essay is entitled "The GOP's Identity Crisis." Maybe it should be the Trump family's identity crisis.
Yeah, I mean, he's not going to be around for that much. He's not going to be around for that much longer.
Yeah, I mean, what you said was interesting about talking to a lot of older people who suggested they don't like Trump. I mean, if he loses today, who knows what's going to happen? But if he does indeed lose, and relatively decisively, in the sense that it's clear that he lost, do you think the knives are going to be out? In your experience in Milwaukee, are there enough people in the Republican Party who will say enough is enough? This guy's a loser, and we need to move on.
I mean, I think you can't lose 2 times in a row. I think that there is enough. It's hard to say. It's hard to say. Like, what are the billionaires going to do? Like, what's Elon Musk going to do? Where's the money going to go? I don't know. I think they are trying to set up to me at the convention, it seemed to me that like J.D. Vance and Vivek Ramaswamy are the people that are sort of creating the most enthusiasm. But at the same time, you do have this kind of thing which the Democrats dealt with in 2016 and in 2020, which is that the younger members of the party have sort of radically different kind of internet inflected ideas about what they want from the party, and the older guard is sort of scandalized a little bit by that, and it's kind of like a power struggle that will be interesting to watch if Trump loses, and even if he wins, frankly.
The traditional narrative in mainstream media over the last few days has been mostly about male and female voters, black and white voters, which is always a feature, and young and old voters. What wisdom did you derive on those fronts from Milwaukee? Were there any young people there? Were any black people there? Were there any women there?
Were there any young people, black people, or women there? Yes, there were. It does skew older. It's very white, and they're more. The women who are there generally wives, even if they're also delegates. Like they're not the main event. They don't have a Sarah Palin at this point, right? There was many of the women who spoke on stage were given this like a pink backdrop. Like it was really not. It was really they're very welcoming to women and minorities. And young people, they're very sort of the rhetoric is all very much we're not racist. America is not a racist country. This is not a racist party, over and over again. Tim Scott gave a big speech about how the Republicans aren't racist. Amber Rose, Kanye West's ex-girlfriend, gave a big speech about how Republicans aren't racist. There was all this kind of state saying how not racist they were. But on the ground, obviously most people are white, most people are old, and most people are men. So it wasn't like super convincing, but it is kind of interesting to watch them say that, because of course, even 10 years ago, they would have never cared about any of those kinds of points.
Early on in the piece, you mentioned DeLillo. I mean, to what extent did he, especially in White Noise, did he predict all this? I mean, not just him, but that school of American writing.
But do you think they're predicting it, or they're just observing their own time and actually it hasn't changed?
I guess, yeah. I mean, probably. I remember a review, I think it was Andrew O'Hagan's review in the New York Review of Books after 9/11, in which they were reviewing one of DeLillo's books about terrorism. And O'Hagan wrote about DeLillo in the sense that reality kind of overtaking his prediction or his kind of work. Mm-hmm. It must be, again, to use a word, surreal here to see this world that DeLillo already imagined in practice.
Well, I think he's probably talking about Underworld, but I think that it's actually, I think it's maybe our idea of history being kind of flawed rather than DeLillo sort of being overtaken. I do think DeLillo has some struggles writing about the internet, but that's like fine. But I think too, because I was reading so much of these convention pieces from the 60s and 70s, you see the conversation is the same, and that's nonfiction, right? And so I actually think this kind of like apocalyptic rhetoric and ever greater spectacle, it does sort of get ever greater, but it has always been getting ever greater. And so I don't know that DeLillo has been like overtaken. I think because also people read Libra now, which is also what people talk about in the wake of the sort of failed assassination attempt on Trump. Everybody was talking about Libra, and which is about the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and the kind of let's say deep state apparatus surrounding that event. And also, White Noise is a satirical novel, but I think that there were sort of some airborne toxic events in the United States over the last.
Yeah, I mean that he could have written. I mean, he actually did write that in the book, I think, about the derailment and in the small town.
Exactly, but I don't think it's because I believe White Noise is based on also a real incident, and DeLillo tends to work with actual news stories. Underworld is also sort of heavily researched and based on real events. So I think actually maybe we have to sort of admit that, like, as writers, as pundits, as journalists, as whatever, it's in our best interest to say now is totally different. Like, now more than ever, everything's totally different. We're in a new paradigm. We're in a new era. This is especially bad. You keep hearing this is the most important election of our lives, and we've been hearing that for every single election, and it's always been that kind of story. So I can't really remember what your question was, but my feeling about DeLillo is like, amazing author, one of the best we ever produced.
Yeah, no, I agree. And this idea of it being the most important election, of course, until the next one. This idea of an identity crisis, Lauren. What is an identity crisis? You noted that America is in a transitional stage. I mean, countries are always in transitional stages. They're always changing. Gramsci, I think, wrote that these kind of periods are a time for monsters. So we imagine the worst. What to you is an identity crisis, and why is the GOP going through it and not the Democrats? Might one argue that it's actually much healthier to face up to this crisis than to basically ignore it as the Democrats seem to be doing?
Yeah, well, I think the Democrats, for all their faults, sort of dealt with this in the last two elections. And actually, you could say, too, the election of Barack Obama in 2008 was also a kind of identity crisis moment for them, because the party, like, sort of like the party didn't really want him, right? And Hillary's people, I believe, in 2008 were sort of really critical of anyone who would go work for Obama, and it was actually like quite a big conflict. So you could say that basically, like, the Democrats have been going through it as well and now they lost so humiliatingly in 2016 that they kind of had to do something about it, and they basically strong-armed the left wing of the party in 2020, which for people of my microgeneration was quite upsetting or like galvanizing in some way. But you just don't really see so much. For someone who was really paying attention in 2020, the dissent against Kamala Harris is so much less than the dissent against Joe Biden in 2020. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, but I'm not sure I mean, if America is indeed in what you call this transitional stage where things are, the nature of the country, perhaps what we might think of as its kind of operating system, is changing so dramatically, the Republicans are trying to face up to it and perhaps making fools of themselves, but at least they're addressing it. Why aren't the Democrats? Or maybe America really isn't. I mean, this idea of a transitional stage is always true. So it's no more transitional in 2024 than it was in 2020 or 1920.
Yeah, well, I think the Democrats have proven themselves to be quite denialists, right? Like they're very centrist. The Republicans, like, the radical wing of the Republican Party. You could argue that J.D. Vance is like part of the radical wing of the Republican Party. So I just think that the Democrats are much sort of risk averse. They're very risk averse at this point, and the things that they want are kind of like a return to normalcy, when the Republicans want like a radical reshaping of the government and society. They want, like I went to some Moms for Liberty event where they weren't talking about this on the convention floor, but the Republicans give hearing to people who want to abolish the Department of Education. I can't remember what Trump's specific view on that is, but that's an incredibly radical proposal.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Lewis wrote a whole book on that, The Fifth Risk.
Yeah, but it's like not inconceivable that they would do that.
Well, they did it. I mean, he did it in 2016. I'm not sure if it was the Department of Education, but some of these departments, they essentially shut down or appointed people who were so hostile to the bureaucratic state that they, by definition, were going to ruin it or undermine it.
And then there was like the acronym RAGE, Retire All Government Employees, and all this kind of stuff. So, but my point is that they see themselves as a revolutionary. The Republicans see themselves as a revolutionary party, and the Democrats are emphatically not. They're defining themselves against the Republicans. So they're like, of course, America's not in an identity crisis. We just need to like get back to normal. But the phrase, to go back to the phrase identity crisis, I think too is a reference also to J.D. Vance, whose whole career is kind of, I argue, based on a sort of perversion of liberal identity politics, or an appeal to a kind of liberal identity politics. And the Republican Party's use of him, or his use of them, is also based on this kind of Appalachian identity he has created for himself in the media.
Lauren, whatever happens today, the country's still profoundly divided. One side's going to win, one side's going to lose, but not by much. Lots of people have written about America in a process of divorce. You've presented the Democrats as denialists and the Republicans as sort of aggressively trying to figure themselves out in a slightly absurd way. Is this like a kind of traditional divorce where one partner denies there's any problems and the other exaggerates them? I don't know what the outcome of that kind of divorce usually is.
I don't know. Are you divorced?
Yeah, but I'm not a denialist.
So you're like
I mean, I was divorced. I'm not anymore.
What?
I mean, I was. So I'm married and divorced.
Okay, but you have been through it. You've experienced.
Yeah, I've done a divorce. Have you?
Yeah, no, I've never been married.
But you've written about, maybe not marriage, but you've written about split up, shall we say? I mean, your book, Fake Accounts, which was a big hit, is about individuals and how they relate to one another. Is this like a kind of, maybe not a divorce, but a breakup in a weird kind of way, which you can't really break up because you can't split the country in two?
Well, I don't think so, because I think it's probably the thing about a romantic relationship is generally you are choosing in some way, at least, to be in it, and you're sort of declaring your desire to be in it at some point in time. So if you're breaking it up, you're kind of, it's seen as a failure, right? Whereas, if you're an American citizen, like, and you were just born in the country, you can't really control where you're born. And you can't really, there are only so many things you can do about that. And about your stake in the American political system and whether it breaks up. But are you asking if this sort of South is going to secede or something like that?
No, I mean, it can't. But I'm saying, does this all tie into perhaps our therapeutic culture? I mean, is it coincidental that the kind of language that's being used both by the participants and observers like yourself is the same kind of language used by therapists, people addressing marriage breakups, relationship breakups, denialism, risk aversity, revenge plots, all this sort of thing?
Well, I think, all the political parties are just made up of individual people. So, and as an individual person, the metaphors that we have at hand are interpersonal metaphors. But I believe, I'm a little rusty on this, but I believe Civilization and Its Discontents by Freud makes a similar kind of argument, right? Which is that there's a sort of interpersonal metaphor that can be expanded to encompass the society. And you can read society psychoanalytically. I'm not a Freudian or even pro psychoanalysis per se, but it's actually not a new tendency that we want to speak in these terms, especially in politics, which it's different from government, right? Like in politics, all of the rhetoric, all of the language that politicians use and that they construct in order to make their case is incredibly personal, and incredibly designed to incite emotion that may remind you of things that happen in private life, say. But no, I mean, are we getting a divorce? Like, you can't get a divorce. We can't. The Democrats and Republicans can't get a divorce. They, maybe they need to grow up, rather than split up.
Finally, Lauren, you're I think your latest collection of essays is No Judgment on Being Critical. One of your strengths as a writer, thinker, broadcaster is your distance. I saw you had 2 interviews recently, one with GQ that says you don't take your work too seriously, and then one with Vanity Fair which suggests you care a lot. I wonder, I mean, and that's probably true of most of us, that we both hopefully don't take ourselves too seriously, but we also in our own way care a lot. Is this something that we should care about? I mean, so much hysteria. You noted earlier, every election is the most important election in American history. 2028 will no doubt be the same. You write without judgment. I think the piece also is written in a sense without judgment. But are you concerned with America? I mean, is this something to really worry about, or is it just one more scene in the surreal history of the United States of America?
Well, I think, of course, it's something to care about. It does. I mean, it's the idea I don't really care about things is obviously not totally true. But I think you can't care about the horse race aspect of politics, and you can't sort of, like, the constant catastrophizing in the media hasn't worked. It's not something that it's not accurate, and it doesn't work. But of course, it would be better. I would prefer Donald Trump not win. Like that will have many effects on even the country where I live, which is Germany. But to that point, like, I don't live in the United States, and I don't live in the United States kind of for political reasons. and of course it would be bad. It would be bad. It would just be, it shouldn't be a horrible catastrophe there, the way that it is. I just don't even, should we care about it? Yeah, I don't think, I think that if people don't care about it, or especially if young people don't care about it, it is a sense of that nothing that you do really matters, and kind of you're like throwing stuff at the wall to see if it sticks politically. And that moment where everyone thought that they could do sort of political activism on social media has thankfully gone away, but there's been nothing to replace it, to produce a kind of political subject for young people. So, I'm like, I don't know what to do.
It's interesting. I mean, I don't want to, I want to end this now because you've been very generous with your time, but I think your point, which hasn't really been made before, and is an odd way, this is 2024 is the first post-internet election. Before, everyone was always obsessed with the internet, always talking about how important it is. And now you don't read much about it. I mean, it's either it's the electric system, so it's just sort of ingrained into the system, or we've gone beyond the internet, God knows where, but the internet doesn't really feature in the discussion anymore.
No, I think that that's true. And I think that that's good, because people are sort of accepting that it's a part of life now. I think the reason it was we focused on it so much in the previous 2 decades is because it was it felt like things were really radically changing. And maybe this sense that I have that, we're sort of transitioning into a new era, and we don't really know like what is the important thing to focus on, is because there was it was so clear, I think, for many people, that things were changing in a particular way with social media, and social media was having these kind of drastic effects, and some people were in denial about that, and they would say, oh, social media doesn't matter, it's not real. Now you can't really say that. But I think I noticed just before we got on the call that there was a breaking news story that the New Yorker published that Russia was, sort of inserting like kind of really bizarre election interference propaganda that was so bad, like it was so bad, and it's not even going to be a big news story, right? Whereas that was such a huge news story, it was such a big story in 2016 and 2020, and now we just sort of accept like, oh yes, the foreign governments are going to attempt to use the internet to interfere in our elections, and we almost certainly do the same. So to relate this back to your question, like, should we all care? I think it's good to be realistic about these things, but it's hard to know like where to put the emphasis, I guess, at this point.
Well, Lauren Oyler, the author of Revenge Plot, not Revenge Post.
I thought you were going to say Revenge Poetry,
yeah.
Which is cool.
You've given me the title of this piece, 2024 is the first post-internet election. I think that's very profound of you. Thank you so much, Lauren. I hope you're happy, because I think you and I probably agree on what the kind of outcome of the election, but it's not the end of the plot, the revenge plot, whatever other kind of plot you want. We have to get you back on the show, Lauren, once the fog has cleared and we have a better idea of America post 2024. Thank you so much, and keep well and safe in Berlin. Really, really appreciate it.
Thanks. Have a good night.
On the scene, he's got the voice that's mean, asking those questions that you never seen. He's got that fire burning bright and clean. Andrew Keen making waves, break the routine on the Keen on show. He brings the heat, asking the minds, digging deep till they bleed. No sugar-coated truths, no lies to deceive. Andrew Keen, the master of the interview beat. He's got the knowledge, he's got the flair, challenging ideas with a fearless stare. With every question, he's uncovering what's there. Andrew Keen, the truth seeker, he's aware.